Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, glad you're back to start off the week on this Monday, July 24th, 2017, day on our calendar. I'm Greg Anthony. You're listening to the Investigative Journal. And before we get started today, I've got two important things to talk about. Go to my website at arcticbeacon.com, and you'll be directed to a site we've just started here called Greg Anthony's Journal, Inside the Investigative Journal, How and Why I Took the Vatican and Jesuits Head On. And before anything else, I'd like to say, go to that site, and there's a donate button, because we're listener supported, and I can use all the help we can get to keep this show on the air. Every now and then we run into financial difficulties, and I'd like to keep broadcasting. So anyway, do that. Press the donate button, and every little bit will be greatly appreciated. Okay, two things I want to talk about today and tie them together in a sense. And the first is how our military right now, folks, is warning us about a war, a nuclear conflict with North Korea. Now, I've been saying this for a while, that I thought there was going to be some type of major conflict during the Trump presidency. And if you listen to the military people here, it could be just North Korea. And don't think they won't start piling on, and that's what I mean other countries. The problem with ISIS, the problem with China, don't think these countries won't start piling on, and America will be in the crosshairs this time. But let me just say this. Although most Americans are aware of the ever-increasing tensions between North Korea and the United States, the military, folks, is no longer pulling any punches. Marine General Joseph Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, suggested very strongly Saturday that Americans must be prepared for the possibility of a military confrontation with North Korea. The United States is now declaring the rogue country's nuclear program an urgent threat, by Dunford as well. While speaking at the Aspen Security Forum in Colorado, a gathering of national security officials, he said this: "Many people have talked about military options with words like unimaginable. I would probably shift that slightly to say it would be horrific, and it would be a loss of life unlike any we have experienced in our lifetimes. And I mean anyone who has been alive since World War II has never seen the loss of life that could occur if there was a conflict on the Korean Peninsula. But as I've told my counterparts, both friend and foe, it is not unimaginable to have military options to respond to North Korea's nuclear capability. What's unimaginable to me is allowing a capability that would allow a nuclear weapon to land in Denver, Colorado. That's unimaginable to me," said Dunford. "So my job will be to develop military options to make sure that doesn't happen." But some of these experts seem to believe North Korea is not a threat. Yet simultaneously, these same experts warn us to expect some military force to be used against the defiant regime at some point in the very near future. Many experts have also warned that North Korea does have the missile capability to strike the United States right now, while others are skeptical. At this stage, Pyongyang and North Korea does not appear capable of delivering a nuclear weapon and such missiles, but its rapid advancement in the overall weapons system is deeply worrying to President Trump's administration, says Politico. Can North Korea hit the United States with a nuclear weapon? Well, the state of Hawaii certainly is not taking any chances. The island state is currently preparing for the worst, a nuclear attack by North Korea. Hawaii is on the schedule to become the first state in the U.S. to test an attack warning system in the event of North Korean nuclear missile strikes. Starting in November, Hawaii's disaster warning plan will include a new protocol in case of a nuclear attack. And that was reported by CNN, folks. Governments across the globe seem intent on starting World War III, don't they? And we will probably be the last to know when it happens. Now, let's look at things here, and let's add this all up. I've talked about how Jesuits and how our world leaders orchestrate wars. This is going to be an orchestrated war. How do you think North Korea gets its money for these weapons? Where do they get the technology? And in fact, if we look back to Obama, he gave this technology and billions of dollars, $150 billion in cash to Iran, the world's biggest terrorist state. So what was he doing? They're trying to arm Islam, North Korea, against the West. So all of these things are being orchestrated, and guess who's behind it? I say it's the Jesuit Vatican-led New World Order. And they are looking for huge conflicts so they can be one step closer to the one world government, one world religion. And now Trump is in there. And what's his main theme? America first. Everything is America. We're going to build a strong military. We're going to do all these things. And basically what's happening is it's going to be futile, and he's going to show that as much as he tries, and he's an orchestrated puppet of the Jesuits as well, as much as he tries, America has no chance. And then you see how they're dividing this country. The left wing of this country, which is Jesuit orchestrated, is pouring money into bringing over Islam. And I'm going to play something. I put something on my website. Then I'm going to go to a book that we've talked about in the past. And it's called How Islam Progressively Takes Over Countries. And it's a book called Islam, Slavery, and Terrorism by Dr. Peter Hammond, a Christian pastor. So let's start out with Islam versus Christianity. The strategy of the Vatican-led New World Order elites, to me, is simple. I've been saying it for years and backing it up with an example that seemed to go over people's heads, or they don't want to deal with it. But really, it's very simple. Pit Islam against Christianity, flood the West with Sharia law followers, watch the chaos erupt. And the video I put on my website just recently, it's the latest post, it went viral. But either it's meant to whip up hatred and violence, and I think that that's the case, or the guy speaking is giving the truth as he sees it. Now, the intro, I'm going to read to you what was sent to me, and this video also aired on Fox right-wing Sean Hannity show. And with that in mind, I think the video is co-Intel produced. And let me tell you why. Look, I have a friend who's been traveling the world. I keep in touch with her all the time. She's lived in countries that had a lot of Muslims. And what she tells me is that the average Muslim is either basically has nothing, does not want war, does not hate Americans, but they are pressured by their Sharia law governments to keep in line. And so there's a war between them, between the fascist and the Sharia law leaders who are controlled. The Jesuits have a strong foothold in many of the countries that we talk about that are basically run by Sharia law. And so if they can control the top with money, power, just like they control the top of our leaders here in supposedly the free world, they can create this conflict. Now, this video you're going to hear, it's 3 minutes long, was an attempt by retired Marine Stephen Gurn. It went viral, 44 million hits in one day. Now, this guy's a big man. I mean, when you look at him, looks like a lineman for the Green Bay Packers and bigger. But the reason I think this is COINTEL produced, because he doesn't talk about the terrorists that are created by the West, and ISIS, which is a Vatican creation as well, is a Vatican-led New World Order creation as well, he talks about the average Muslims, the average people in the street who want to kill Americans. And I think that is geared towards Americans listening to that and then having a grassroots hatred build up. That's why they put it out there. 44 million people will listen and say, oh, the average Muslim hates us. I don't agree with that. But let's listen to it. And here's what was sent with it. And whoever wrote it didn't get it. But he got the major thing. But he didn't get the little added scenario that I just said. But it said this: the globalists want to saturate America with the very people that hate us. Now, why would they want to do this? Simple. They want to wipe out Christianity so they can reign in their Antichrist one-world leader over a one-world government. Now then set up a one-world religion. So he's there, Luciferianism. The global cabal are just going to use Islam as a means to destroy Christianity. But they hate Muslims as well. They have been deceived also. It's just a means to their end and final goals. Okay, so let's look at the basic America. How many people in the street, average Joe, want to kill Muslims? None. I don't think there are many. They hear propaganda and they get angry, and I think the same thing goes on over there. But it's this festering at the top levels, using money and power to get extremists to whip up anger. And I believe this guy is doing the same thing. Now, I may be wrong. He may have seen this. He may be on the level, but you make up your mind. So let's listen to what he has to say. Okay, if I can get this going, I will. It's taking a bit longer than I thought. Here he is.
What's going on? I just want to take a minute and reach out to everybody and talk about a certain subject that came up the other morning, and I think people should know about it. Obviously, I don't work over in the United States. I work overseas, and I'm currently in Iraq, which is one of the countries that were on the list. And there's been a lot of discussion about the executive order. Obviously, in the United States, there's lots going on, and over here, there's a lot going on as well. Just a lot of things you all don't see. So the other morning, we were having a discussion on the executive order, and a lot of the Iraqis obviously showed their displeasure in this executive order, and why they feel like they've been betrayed by the United States and so on. Now, I'm not here to get into a discussion with you about policies or this or that or anything like that. I just want to talk to you and make a comment about the discussion I actually had with these gentlemen. So I listened to what they had to say, and after they were done, yelling and screaming about their opinion on things, I asked a simple question, and I got an answer to that simple question, and I got it without hesitation. My simple question was, as an American, if I went out in town right now, would I be welcome? And they instantly said, absolutely not, you would not be welcome. And I said, okay, so what would happen if I went out in town? And they said, the locals would snatch me up and kill me within an hour. I'd be tortured first, and after they were done torturing me, I'd probably be beheaded. It would, go on video for everybody to see as, an example. And so I already knew this was going to happen, but I wanted to hear it from them. And, the point I'm trying to make is, this is the local populace that would do this. This isn't ISIS. This isn't Al-Qaeda. This isn't the PMU. This isn't a militia from the Iranians or anything like that. This is the local populace that would do this. My question to them was pretty simple then, after that. If you would do this to me in your country, why would I let you in my country? Because all this means to me is that if you had the opportunity to take the life of an American, you would do it. So maybe that's something you all need to think about back there. If this is the way some of these cultures feel, this is the way that these countries feel about Americans, why would you be so naive to believe that if they came to the United States, they would do anything any different than what they would do right here in their own country? I don't know, man. Just trying to inform you about what's actually happening on the ground in one of the banned countries. Something you should probably think about. I can't go out in town here. Why should they go outside of my country?
Okay, there you have it. So what are you left with after you listen to that? That even the local average Joe in a Muslim country hates us. And so what does that attempt to do? When we allow Muslims here now, the average Joe in America will say, hey, if we were in your country, you'd behead us. So what's going to happen? There's going to be a conflict, right? They're whipping up the masses. Not only are they creating the terrorist groups that are doing it, but now they enlist, I believe, a Marine to do their dirty work, so to speak. I don't trust that video. Now, you make up your own mind. But anyway, I want to show, and then you wonder, we're talking about Islam, and we're talking about, we know Iran is building its nuclear capability as we speak. You don't hear much about that anymore. And where was Donald Trump? One of his campaign pledges was, I'm getting rid of that Iran deal. Everybody's forgotten about it. We're all concentrating on North Korea, right? So we let Iran slip away. But like I said, it'll be a pylon. And what I mean by a pylon is that once they have a powder keg event, how many times are they going to have another Pearl Harbor? We're talking about Hawaii now again. Well, they're going to just repeat the orchestrated Pearl Harbor in World War II and do it now a little differently? I mean, come on. Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Churchill knew exactly what was happening, because they were working together with Stalin. And guess who brokered the deal with Stalin? A guy by the name of Father Edmund Walsh, who's a Jesuit priest at Georgetown University. He was sent over there in the guise of giving aid to the Bolsheviks. They had food. He went over with a blank check. And guess what he did? He forced Lenin to, he held out the West money and said, we'll help you, but Stalin has to have a major role. And guess what happens? They end up killing Lenin. And then Stalin becomes the biggest mass murderer in the history of the world, a Jesuit priest, by the way. If you don't believe it, check out his background. Oh, you won't hear it in they change history, but when you start digging a little bit, you find out. So what are they doing now? They're using that Korean dictator in the same way. And how many are they going to create? All you need is one little incident like that. Something to ignite it. Didn't you hear that general say, well, we could do something against North Korea. Then North Korea lobs something over. And then other countries like Iran and all of the other countries that are on the side of the Jesuits are lining up the battlegrounds here. And it's really interesting. It seems to be the West against the world, right? And all it needs is another. It'll be interesting to see if they use Pearl Harbor again. But anyway, that leads into, so we got all these little things going on. The war, we hear about it all the time. Now they're telling it, they're talking openly about it. Watch out. But how does that really play into this whole idea of Islam? Well, I referred to a book because people are interested. What happens here is we look at America and we say, well, Muslims here are moderates. They like the freedom here. But you see, if the Sharia law terrorists and all these people, we have groups here in our country that claim to be moderate Muslims, but they're not. They're funded by the United States. One is Fethullah Gulen's movement, which has given taxpayer money to open up charter schools. And his movement is he was brought over here by William Jefferson Clinton in the 90s. He lives in the Pocono Mountains in a mansion. He's got billions of dollars all over the world, and they front these moderate Muslim schools, but they're actually terrorist cells. And that's why Erdogan, who's the president of Turkey, had asked the United States to turn over Gulen because he was responsible, along with the CIA, of that coup in Turkey that was billed as Erdogan being the bad guy, when in fact he wants Gulen back, and guess what? Kerry and Obama wouldn't do it, and guess what? Either is Trump. If Trump was true about wanting to stop Muslims from entering this country, the first guy that would leave would be Fethullah Gulen. But not a word. The fix is in. So you wonder what happens. Why do moderate, let's say you have the average Joe Muslim in a Sharia-run country that doesn't allow freedom, doesn't allow women to drive and all that kind of stuff. They have honor killings of their own family members. Do you think the average Muslim grieves with that? No. They don't want to fight America. They don't want to even live under that suppressed law there, but they are forced to. That's what they'll do here. They'll force people into it, and guess what? First of all, they got to wipe away Western average Joe Americans because we're not going to put up with it. Then once they have a solid Muslim population, they'll kowtow, and the average Muslim, just to keep his neck on, his head on his shoulders, and that's literally, he'll just fall right in lockstep. So, Dr. Peter Hammond's book, Slavery, Terrorism, and Islam, I've talked about it before, documents, and it's well done, Muslims, how they slowly develop a presence in various countries, and as their population numbers build, they become more aggressive and assertive about exercising Sharia law. We're already seeing this, folks, and I'm going to get into this in depth, and I'll play part of an interview that I found with Dr. Hammond. We'll hear what he has to say a bit. But the problem is you're seeing this growth, this Sharia law, grow in places like England, and you're seeing it in France, Germany. And the reason is based on what Dr. Hammond says here. And I'm going to get to that in the second half hour. And you'll see that he is right to he did a huge study on this all over the world. And we're seeing it play out right before our eyes in Europe. Now, if you don't want it to happen here, what can you do? If we allow these military leaders and our government to basically hang over our heads this idea of democracy when it's not, because they're doing the exact same thing here as these fascist leaders and these Sharia leaders in these oppressive countries like Iran are doing. They're just doing it in a different way. And in the end, the people that are going to really pay are the average Joe Muslim and the average Joe American, and average Joe Brit, and average Joe, the person in Germany and France, till Western civilization is brought to its knees. And how can they ever have a one-world government, a one-world order, unless they have an oppressive system? It will be billed as freedom, but it won't be. And so we're going to look at what Dr. Hammond did in his book called Slavery, Terrorism, and Islam. When we return for the second half hour on this Monday on the Investigative Journal. Don't forget, hit that donate button on my website. Go to arcticbeacon.com. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the Scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal. And before we get back to Dr. Peter Hammond's book, Islam, Terrorism, and Slavery, I did want to mention, we're talking in the last half hour about what's happening in North Korea, Iran, how basically Obama set for 8 years, Obama was feeding these countries every possible technology and weapons and money so they could build up their forces. And now we have Donald Trump, who's just the opposite, saying we've got to fight these people now and we're going to put America first. But the reason you're hearing just so much garbage out of Washington, Trump is there to keep you from really looking at what's really going on. That's why he's tweeting all the time. That's why he's got everybody mesmerized by all of his craziness, as well as all you hear is Trump involvement with Russia, when there really isn't much there, but they're playing it up, folks, so that you don't start thinking about what they're really doing behind the scenes, some of the things we had talked about in the first half hour. While all that's going on, they're building this immigration open border policies. Even though Trump says closed borders, our borders haven't changed. Nothing's changed. It's just a lot of talk. And it's a good stage play. And you're one of the extras, just like me, and we don't even get paid. We pay them. But anyway, back to something really important. Dr. Hammond wrote this book, and I'm going to, a guy named Mark Ellis, he wrote a little piece about it. I'm going to paraphrase some stuff from him and then get to a little interview he did. But he said this, Hammond said, well, the book really does this. It shows how Muslims slowly develop a presence in various countries, and as their population numbers build, become more aggressive and assertive about exercising Sharia law. And he said in his book, quote, Islam isn't a religion, nor is it a cult. In its fullest form, it's a complete, total, 100% system of life. Islam, he says, has religious, legal, political, economic, social, and military components. The religious component is a beard or cover for all the other components. Sounds like the Vatican, doesn't it? The religion is a cover for them as well. And although he doesn't deal with this in his book, we've dealt with it many times in how the Vatican had a strong hand in creating Islam to begin with. Now, their takeover country is what Hammond calls as Islamization. Begins when the population of Muslim reaches a critical mass, and they begin to agitate for various privileges. Now, that's exactly what the Vatican did here. From one diocese, when this country was formed, they created a constitution so they could get in to this country under the guise of freedom of religion. When nobody wanted them here, they realized we look back at the Protestants that created this country. They didn't want any Catholics here because they know what they did when they gained power or numbers in Europe. But they have, haven't they? So this is how it works according to Hammond, though. When the Muslim population remains under 2% in a country, they will be seen primarily as a peace-loving minority and not as a threat to other citizens. And that's exactly what's happening here. In the United States, it's about 8%, 0.8. Australia, maybe 1.8. Canada, 2.1. China, 2.0. Italy, well, this was done, I think Italy's a little higher now, but they say 2.0. Norway, 2.0. I think that's a little higher. But he goes on to say, as the Muslim population reaches anywhere from 3 to 5%, they begin to recruit from ethnic minorities and disaffected groups within prisons and street gangs. This is happening, I believe it's happening here. Denmark, Germany, United Kingdom, Spain, Thailand, and their populations range from anywhere from 3 to 5%, or maybe even a little more now. From 5%, they exercise an inordinate influence in proportion to their percentage of the population, Dr. Hammond notes. For example, they will push for the introduction of halal, clean by Islamic standards, food, and increase pressure on the supermarket chains to feature such food on their shelves, along with threats for failure to comply. This is happening where there's population in France of 8 to 9%, Philippines 6%, Sweden over 6%. I think these are higher now. Switzerland 5%, Netherlands 6%, Trinidad and Tobago 6%. So soon they begin to apply pressure to allow Sharia law within their own communities, sometimes even in the ghettos. That's exactly what's going on in Europe today. It actually started here. When Muslims approach 10, they tend to increase lawlessness as a means of complaint about their conditions. In Paris, we are already seeing car burnings, and in Germany, and non-Muslim actions offends Islam, and as a result, an uprising and threats, such as in Amsterdam with opposition to Muhammad cartoons and films about Islam. You can't go into certain zones where Muslims live in those countries now, or you'll be harassed if you're not Muslim. Police don't even go in. Now, in these countries, supposedly like this, are Guyana, India, Israel, Kenya, Russia. Russia has over 15 to 16, 20% Muslim. Kenya, 11. Israel, 16. And probably higher. India, 14. Guyana, 10. But it gets worse, because the violence increases when Muslim population reaches 20%. After reaching 20%, nations can expect hair-trigger rioting, jihad militia formations, sporadic killings, and the burnings of Christian churches and Jewish synagogues. Ethiopia is an example, with 33% Muslim. But when it gets even higher, around 40%, nations experience widespread massacres, chronic terror attacks, and ongoing militia warfare, such as in Bosnia, Chad, Lebanon, 60%, or almost 60. But from 60, persecutions of non-believing infidels rises significantly, including sporadic ethnic cleansing, genocide, use of Sharia law as a weapon, and jizya, a tax placed on infidels, such as in Albania, 70% Muslim, Malaysia, 60.4%, Qatar, 77%, Sudan, 70%. And the real point is here, these strict Muslim policies are also used against Muslims who don't comply. So they're as much in harm's way as Westerners. After 80% expect this, he says, daily intimidation, violent jihad, some state-run ethnic cleansing, and even some genocide as these nations drive out infidels and move towards a 100% Muslim society, which has been experienced to some degree in Bangladesh, Egypt, Gaza, Indonesia, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Morocco, Pakistan, Syria, Tajikistan, Turkey, United Arab Emirates. But at 100%, Muslim societies will theoretically usher in their version of peace, the peace of Dar Islam, the Islamic house of peace. Here there's supposed to be peace because everybody is a Muslim. The madrasas are the only schools, and the Quran is the only word, such as in Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, and Yemen. Dr. Hammond observes this Islamic ideal is seldom realized. Unfortunately, peace is never achieved. As in these 100% states, he says, the most radical Muslims intimidate and spew hatred and satisfy their bloodlust by killing less radical Muslims for a variety of reasons. Quote, he says, it's important to understand that in some countries with well under 100% Muslim populations, such as in France, the minority Muslim population live in ghettos, within which they are 100% Muslim, and within which they live by Sharia law. They're not assimilating, folks. Dr. Hammond is also concerned by the demographic trends. Today's 1.5 billion Muslims make up 22% of the world's population, he observes. But their birth rates dwarf the birth rates of Christians. Hindus, Buddhists, Jews, and all other believers. Muslims will exceed 50% of the world's population by the end of the century. Okay, so here we have it. Once their populations increase, you can expect a new one world government, one world order. Let's listen to this interview that was done recently, and you'll hear a little bit from Dr. Hammond. Okay, this interview was done when Dr. Hammond was in South Africa, and let's play it. Here we go.
And I want to begin with this statement. It says, the greatest conflict of the past century has been between Islam and civilization. The most convulsive conflict of the past century, and indeed the most convulsive conflict of the past millennium, has undoubtedly been between Islam and civilization. That's quite an amazing statement.
It really is so, but you see, Islam has been attacking Christian civilization for over 1,400 years, and the threats to civilization have been so overwhelming, and at this moment what we're seeing is not something that's an aberration, but something which has been a 14th century ongoing clash. It started with Islam attacking Jerusalem, taking it already in the 7th and massacring the inhabitants, and then massacring the inhabitants of Alexandria and Carthage, all the way through to Constantinople, where they massacred the entire inhabitants of the largest city in the world at that time in 1453. The threat to Vienna as late as 1683. Interesting that the threat to Vienna, which is the heart of Europe in many ways, the siege of Vienna, was broken on the 11th of September in 1683.
Now,
and it's also interesting to notice that the Muslims are very much alert to dates. The siege of Malta, which was one of the greatest conflicts, one of the last of the great battles of the Crusades, when the Knights of St. John fought to protect Malta, which was a thorn in the side of the Islamic attacks on southern Europe. And that battle was won on the 11th of September. And when the Muslims chose to attack America on the 11th of September, it's not accidental. They chose it because it was the dates of two of the worst defeats Islam ever suffered in trying to subjugate Europe to Islam.
Now, here's the other side of that statement. It says, despite this inescapable fact, most people today do not actually know very little about Islam. And after reading this book, I would say I knew very little about Islam.
There's several reasons for that. One of the reasons is that Islam is not very tolerant of dissent or of criticism. And because of Islamic terrorism, death threats, fatwas, which is judicial death threats on people who upset Islam to some degree or another, and the fact of petrol bombs and riots and hair-trigger violence, many journalists in the world, and historians, and authors, and editors, rather pass on to some other subject because of the intimidation factor. And then you get, in addition to the intimidation and fear factor, you also get a tremendous prejudice against Christianity in most of the secular humanist West. And therefore Hollywood and the education institutions and the political institutions are so scared of upsetting Islam, but also they hate Christianity. And therefore, when Christians are being attacked, they secretly seem to be happy, and there's all of these reasons come together to explain why we hear so little about Islam.
Well, now, here's another statement. It says, slave trade to America lasted for just over 3 centuries. The Arab involvement in slave trade has lasted for 14 centuries, and in some parts of the Muslim world is still continuing to this day. Now, I don't think many people realize that either.
No, there have been so many films, so many documentaries, so many articles written on the American involvement of the slave trade. And this is what actually started my book. The very first beginning of the book was the fact that I knew that the Arab slave trade way outnumbered any European or American involvement in the slave trade. But when I started to study further, I was shocked. Do you know, of the 10 million slaves that crossed the Atlantic, less than 4.4% came to North America. The slaves went to South and Central America, to the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish possessions, and a very small percentage, only 4.4%, went to North America. And yet, from the media coverage and the educational attention, you would have sworn that the United States of America monopolized the slave trade, and yet it was the smallest involvement of all.
Now, it says here, while almost all the slaves shipped across the Atlantic were for agricultural work, most of the slaves destined for the Muslim Middle East were for sexual exploitation as concubines in harems and for military service.
That is correct. The Muslim states had this insatiable appetite for concubines, and in their harems they just overflowed. They couldn't get enough of them, and so there was tremendous sexual exploitation in the slave trade in the Middle East. But in addition to that, they wanted most of their fighting to be done by slaves. And in fact, the elite fighting unit of the Muslims were the Janissaries, who were Christian boys taken forcibly from Christian families. And from age 8, they knew nothing but brutality and violence and discipline, and they were the most fanatical of all, and they were expendable because they weren't the children of Muslim families.
Yeah, I'd heard that from Dr. D. Jane Kennedy, in a book that he wrote that he said that the Muslims were good at kidnapping children and especially boys and converting them to terrorists.
And of course it's happening to this day. And when you start hearing about violence in Paris, and they say that Paris youth are rioting, well, it wasn't Philippe and Louis who were rioting. It was Rashid, Abdullah, Muhammad, it was Ibrahim. They were the ones rioting. So when they spoke about the Paris youth rioting, don't think it was French youth, it was Arab youth in France.
Brother,
and when you hear about these British youngsters involved in suicide bombing, it's not British youngsters, it was Muslims in Britain doing this. And the BBC recently had a program speaking about honor killings in Britain, and they managed to have a half-an-hour program on honor killings without mentioning Islam, Muhammad, Sharia, Quran. Isn't that bizarre?
Yes.
It's not English parents are not killing their daughters.
Now,
it's Muslims who are killing their daughters in honor murders, and yet the BBC tried to make it sound like a British problem, and they didn't want to identify where it was coming from.
Now, here's another eye-opening statement. It says, the most vicious terrorism originates from the least evangelized areas of the world.
This should not actually surprise us. Where the church has done the least, where we have the least missionary presence, we have the greatest problems. In fact, the Middle East was the birthplace of the Christian church. If you think Jerusalem, Damascus, Antioch, all the places that the seven churches of the book of Revelation, Smyrna, these places were the heartland of Christianity, but they were conquered by Islam by force. And today, the worst persecution that Christians are suffering anywhere in the world today are in places that used to be Christian, which today are Muslim, and where there's no religious freedom, and as a result, very little missionaries go there. So where the church has done the least to fulfill the Great Commission, you have the most dictatorships, the worst human rights abuses, you have the greatest terrorist threat, the greatest military threat to the free world. It shouldn't surprise us. The biggest problems come from the area where there's the least amount of Christians and the most amount of unevangelized people.
Well,
it actually shouldn't surprise us.
Bridget Gabriel, are you familiar with her? She was,
that's correct. She's from...
They kind of murdered all the Christians and kicked them out. And she went to Israel and received help. And now she started one of the biggest organizations in America to combat Muslim takeover of the United States.
Yes, the point she makes is very important. Lebanon was the only Arab country in the Middle East that ever was a democracy. And that was when Lebanon was a majority Christian country with over 60% of the population Christian. And Lebanon was a viable, tolerant democracy until Islamic persecution drove the Christians out of the country in such numbers that the Christians went to be a minority, and the moment the Muslims gained a majority in Lebanon, democracy was extinguished, and then Syria invaded, and the situation just got worse and worse. And before you knew it, Beirut, which used to be the Paris of the Middle East, it suddenly became synonymous with terrorism and disaster and absolute breakdown of law and order. And it's terrible to think that Lebanon was once one of the jewels of the Mediterranean, and then it became a basket case of terrorism.
Of course, you have a lot here. It says the primary aim of Islam is not spiritual but political. And that I have marked in the margin is what Hitler was about. They were about world conquest, not any kind of religion. Is that right?
When you hear an American president like Bill Clinton saying no religion tolerates violence or condones violence and terrorism, he's wrong.
Absolutely.
Islam does. But Islam is no ordinary religion. Islam is unlike any other religion because it's really first and foremost political. Now you can see this by their dating. First of all, they don't date it from the birth of Muhammad. They don't date it from the onset of the revelations to Muhammad. They date it from when Muhammad established a political state, Sharia law, in Medina. So the first 11 years of Muhammad's work, that doesn't count. They date from Islam divides the whole world into Dar al-Islam, the house of war, and Dar al-Islam, the house of peace. Anywhere where Sharia law is enforced is a house of peace. Anywhere where there's resistance to Islam is a house of war. That's why they can say any military act by them is defensive, because by definition of Islam, if you're not submitted to Islam, you are guilty of aggression. And so when they say, oh, jihad is only self-defense, well, that's because their definition of peace is the absence of resistance to Islam.
Now, you have quite a lot in here about the Crusades in the Middle Ages, and the important point here that I got was that they were a reaction to the Islamic invasion of the Holy Lands.
Yes. You know, when people start speaking about the Crusades, it's incredible how it's normally not given in its context of a reaction to jihad. Bill Clinton said, this great authority on the Middle East, he said, the tensions and violence in the Middle East began with the Crusades. Well, it's hard to believe that a man could be that ignorant.
Yeah.
The Crusades began after 5 centuries of Islamic jihad, when they had laid waste to Christian civilization of the whole of North Africa, destroyed over 3,200 churches in the first 300 years of Islam alone, just in North Africa.
How many?
Okay, we got to break it off there. That was only about 12 minutes of a very long interview, and I'm going to come back tomorrow because I'm going to continue with Dr. Peter Hammond. A pretty good interview. And I did want to say this. The missing link, and I'd like to add this to his information, is the Vatican connection to Islam and the similarities of the Vatican and Catholicism to Islam. And let's not forget, when we say Christian, we're not talking about the Roman Catholic Church. Its pagan ways need to be exposed. Many of the people that are in the Roman Catholic Church don't understand it, but the hierarchy does. So this missing link is the Vatican connection to Islam, even in its creation, and what they're doing today to destroy Christianity. That is, Vatican and Islam together. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.